There is probably more evidence to say that Hitler survived and escaped and ended up in South America.
When World War II ended,
the last communique of World War II is in. The Russian people were told for the first time of Germany's unconditional surrender.
Adolf Hitler was reported dead in his Berlin bunker.
This is London calling. Here is a news flash. The German radio has just announced that Hitler is dead.
But rumors of a secret escape to South America have persisted for decades. It was actually believed even by millions. Recently uncovered documents and records from Argentina reveal how post-war chaos created hidden routes and safe havens that allowed high-ranking Nazis to vanish. These findings fuel the enduring mystery. Could Hitler have slipped through history's grasp, leaving a trail that historians are only now beginning to trace? Vanishing Point, Argentina, and the Nazi escape networks. In the chaos that gripped Europe after 1945, borders were porous, governments were reeling, and countless officials, soldiers, and collaborators were desperate to disappear. Among these were individuals who had served the Third Reich at high levels, now facing prosecution or summary justice. Historians have documented how an intricate web of escape routes, often called rat lines, allowed these fugitives to slip past Allied controls and find sanctuary in distant lands. These networks stretched across Europe, often beginning in Italy, passing through Spain and Portugal, and finally delivering refugees to the far reaches of South America, where sympathetic governments and private networks offered relative safety. Argentina became the most notable destination, its remote expanses and politically favorable climate offering a perfect hiding place. The country, under the leadership of Juan Perón, was willing to welcome these newcomers for a combination of ideological affinity, economic incentive, and the chance to bolster technical expertise. Engineers, doctors, and military personnel brought specialized skills that the government valued, and the distance from Europe made it nearly impossible for Allied forces to conduct thorough searches. Coastal cities, secluded towns, and rural regions all became temporary or permanent homes for those fleeing prosecution. The logistics of these escapes were carefully organized, often exploiting loopholes in post-war bureaucracy. Ships and planes transported people and documents, sometimes under assumed names or with falsified identities. Financial networks ensured they had funds to start new lives. While many of the figures who fled are well documented, the question that has long haunted investigators is whether Hitler himself could have used such channels to vanish. Though mainstream historians overwhelmingly agree that he died in April 1945, the discovery of these escape networks has made the notion of a secret flight into South America tantalizing enough to warrant closer scrutiny. These routes were not mere improvisations. They were sophisticated operations. Clerics, sympathetic diplomats, and officials often assisted by issuing travel papers, visas, or falsified passports. Ships leaving European ports under the cover of commercial trade carried not only goods, but passengers who had to disappear from plain sight. Along the way, the fugitives relied on clandestine support from private citizens who had fled fascism themselves or held loyalty to the old regime. By the time they reached Argentina, many were able to integrate quietly, adopting new identities and blending into communities that were often unaware or deliberately indifferent to their pasts. Historians examining newly declassified files from Argentine archives have revealed the scale and organization of these operations. Documents detail arrivals in Buenos Aires and other ports, the issuance of identification papers, and even assistance in purchasing property or establishing businesses. The archival evidence paints a picture of a nation that, whether motivated by political strategy or opportunism, provided a secure endpoint for these refugees. Within this network, rumors of a high-profile escape, specifically of Hitler, began to circulate among locals. fueling decades of speculation. It is within this context that the mystery deepens. While there is no verified evidence that Hitler himself reached Argentina, the environment was such that, theoretically, a figure of his notoriety could have been concealed. Remote towns and settlements offered natural cover. Language barriers and sympathetic networks helped fugitives maintain secrecy. Investigators and historians tracing the rat lines have repeatedly emphasized that while the escape of Hitler remains improbable, the systems that allowed numerous high-ranking Nazis to vanish were real, operational, and, in some cases, astonishingly efficient. The allure of these networks is partly because they intersected with real human ingenuity under duress. Escapees needed to navigate shifting allegiances, exploit bureaucratic loopholes, and establish new identities while avoiding international pursuit. Each step required coordination, foresight, and sometimes luck. Even decades later, archival discoveries continue to reveal details of travel routes, safe houses, and the complex interplay between local authorities and expatriates. These networks illustrate the capacity for survival, secrecy, and adaptation in a post-war world that was chaotic, fractured, and full of opportunity for those who knew how to exploit it. By examining Argentina not merely as a geographic location, but as a political and social haven, it becomes clear why the country holds a central place in post-war escape lore. Its role was not accidental. The Perón administration deliberately cultivated conditions favorable to certain migrants, both for strategic gains and to influence the perception of Argentina as a haven for displaced Europeans. Over time, this created an environment in which former Nazi officials could quietly establish new lives, often in the shadows of towns and rural landscapes that retained a deliberate distance from prying eyes. This also sheds light on why the notion of Hitler's escape has remained compelling. The plausibility arises from the documented success of the rat lines themselves. If countless high-ranking Nazis could disappear into Argentina, why could one of the most infamous figures in history not have attempted the same? While no credible evidence has emerged confirming such a flight, the historical framework of escape routes, the existence of safe havens, and the socio-political conditions in Argentina create a context where the myth is not entirely implausible to imagine. Historians continue to weigh the available evidence, combining forensic analysis, archival research, and eyewitness accounts from local populations. The focus is often on understanding the broader systems of post-war escape and concealment, rather than validating specific conspiracy theories. Still, these investigations underscore how human networks, political strategy, and geography converged to create opportunities for fugitives. They also provide a cautionary lesson about the power of gaps in documentation, secrecy, and rumor, how a single missing record can fuel decades of speculation, intrigue, and storytelling. By starting with Argentina and the escape networks, the story emphasizes the centrality of environment, opportunity, and political context over individual names. The mechanisms that enabled these disappearances demonstrate both the reach of the post-war Nazi diaspora and the challenges historians face in reconstructing events. Whether Hitler himself ever crossed the Atlantic remains unproven, but understanding the infrastructure that allowed so many others to survive provides insight into why such claims have persisted for decades and why the hunt for truth continues to fascinate researchers and the public alike. The rat lines show how high-ranking Nazis disappeared, but the question remains: what really happened to Hitler in those final days, and why do rumors of his escape last? The final days. As the Soviet army closed in on Berlin in April 1945, Adolf Hitler's world contracted to the confines of the Führer bunker. The city above him was in ruins, bombed relentlessly, and chaos reigned on the streets. Historical records, eyewitness testimonies, and documents from bunker survivors indicate that Hitler spent his final days isolated, surrounded by a dwindling inner circle, and facing the inevitability of defeat. Communications were sparse, morale was collapsing, and plans for the defense of the city were failing at every turn. The accepted historical narrative concludes that Hitler took his own life on April 30th, 1945, alongside Eva Braun, in a dramatic but private act witnessed by only a handful of aides. The bodies were reportedly burned, and the Soviets recovered fragments that were later confirmed through forensic analysis, including dental records. This account has been the cornerstone of mainstream history for decades, leaving little room for doubt among serious historians. Yet, despite this overwhelming evidence, rumors of escape emerged almost immediately. These stories ranged from whispered claims among survivors to sensational accounts circulated by journalists and foreign intelligence agencies. Some suggested that Hitler had been smuggled out via hidden tunnels, disguised, and ferried to neutral or sympathetic countries. Others claimed he had boarded a submarine or airplane, vanishing into South America or even the Middle East. While most historians dismiss these accounts, the existence of escape networks and the historical precedent of high-ranking Nazis fleeing Europe lent them a veneer of plausibility. The persistence of these rumors is partly psychological. The idea that Hitler could have survived, evading justice and disappearing into anonymity, captivates the imagination in a way that confirmed death cannot. It also reflects broader anxieties about accountability, justice, adherentilis, and the limits of historical knowledge. In a war marked by unprecedented destruction, the thought of one of its central figures slipping away feeds both fascination and conspiracy thinking. Eyewitness accounts from the bunker are central to understanding what likely happened, but they are not entirely free from ambiguity. Several aides reported seeing Hitler's body after the self-harm, while others were too frightened or traumatized to be reliable witnesses. Over time, discrepancies in recollections and incomplete documentation have allowed alternative narratives to gain traction, even as new archival materials reaffirm the conventional account. Intelligence agencies, including the FBI and allied services, conducted investigations into possible escape attempts, reviewing intercepted communications, sightings, and rumors. While none produced evidence of Hitler leaving Berlin alive, the files themselves often fueled speculation, demonstrating how secrecy and partial information can create enduring myths. The notion of Hitler's escape also intersects with political and cultural considerations. During the immediate post-war period, the Allies were intensely focused on prosecuting major war criminals, establishing tribunals, and stabilizing Europe. Any rumors of his survival were treated cautiously, both to avoid misinformation and to maintain the integrity of ongoing investigations. Yet, these very precautions sometimes contributed to the perception of a cover-up, giving rise to a rich subculture of conspiracy theorists and writers who explored the idea in books, films, and news articles over decades. Historians today approach these claims with a critical eye, emphasizing evidence over speculation. They point out that while escape networks existed for other high-ranking Nazis, there is no credible documentation linking Hitler to them. Nevertheless, the persistent rumors highlight the porous boundary between fact and legend, showing how a combination of wartime chaos, incomplete records, and human imagination can sustain alternative histories for generations. Even without confirming an escape, studying these claims provides insight into the social and political landscape of the time. They reveal the challenges historians face in reconstructing events from fragments, the role of rumor in shaping public perception, and the way extraordinary figures like Hitler become magnets for extraordinary stories. The fascination with his potential survival underscores the continuing human desire to question and reimagine history, especially when its most infamous characters seem to vanish without a trace. The bunker, the chaos of Berlin, and the documented evidence of Hitler's death remain central to the historical record. Yet, the enduring allure of escape narratives, fueled by the very real success of other Nazi fugitives, who fled Europe keeps the mystery alive in popular culture and scholarly discussion alike. Understanding these stories does not rewrite history, but it illuminates the context in which they arose, the psychological impulses behind them, and the networks that made real post-war escapes possible. While rumors and eyewitness accounts keep the mystery alive, decades of forensic analysis and newly declassified files offer the clearest window yet into what really happened and what questions still linger. Pieces of the puzzle. Decades after the fall of Berlin, researchers and historians have returned repeatedly to the question of Adolf Hitler's final moments, fueled by both curiosity and the persistent rumors of escape. While eyewitness accounts from the Führerbunker provide the initial framework, forensic evidence and archival discoveries have become the cornerstone for understanding what likely transpired. The Soviets, who arrived first at the bunker, recovered charred remains believed to be Hitler and Eva Braun. For decades, access to these fragments was tightly controlled, leading to speculation and, at times, outright conspiracy. Modern forensic science has shed new light on these events. Dental records, cross-checked against surviving dental assistants' notes and detailed X-rays, provided strong confirmation of Hitler's identity. These records, often overlooked in sensational accounts, are widely considered the most reliable proof of his death. In addition, fragments of the jaw and skull, preserved in Soviet archives, were later examined with contemporary technology, further confirming the accounts of the self-harm. Researchers have consistently emphasized that while rumors persist, the weight of scientific evidence points to death in April 1945, leaving little room for the possibility of a secret escape. However, declassified files from Allied intelligence agencies reveal just how seriously the idea of a potential escape was taken at the time. The FBI, for example, investigated numerous reports of Hitler sightings in Europe, South America, and even remote regions of the Middle East. Agents reviewed documents, interviewed witnesses, and compiled reports of alleged sightings. While none of these claims were ever substantiated, the files illustrate the level of concern that intelligence agencies had regarding the potential for high-profile Nazis to evade justice. These investigations inadvertently contributed to the enduring fascination with the escaped dictator narrative. Argentina, as previously discussed, is central to understanding why the escape narrative gained traction. Newly released Argentinian government records show a significant influx of European immigrants, including those with questionable war records. While these records do not provide direct evidence of Hitler, they contextualize the environment. It was politically feasible, geographically distant, and administratively opaque enough to allow a fugitive to hide, which is why conspiracy theorists often focus here. Combined with known Nazi ratlines, this historical backdrop adds plausibility to hypothetical escape scenarios, even if they remain unproven. Forensic efforts have also extended beyond the physical remains. Researchers have analyzed photographs, bunker layouts, and contemporaneous reports to reconstruct the final days. Even the minutiae, burned furniture, trace elements in the soil, and accounts of bunker personnel serve as corroborating evidence. Each piece helps historians differentiate between fact and rumor, providing a multidimensional picture of events. Sophisticated techniques like DNA sampling and radiographic comparisons, though limited by available material, reinforce the conclusion that Hitler did not survive the bunker. The release of declassified intelligence also offers insight into how governments attempted to track or anticipate potential post-war movements. Cables from US and British agencies show the monitoring of shipping manifests, airline records, and correspondence between South American contacts. In some instances, intelligence officers investigated specific individuals known to have helped high-ranking Nazis escape. These documents revealed the meticulous, often frustrating work of post-war investigators, highlighting the immense difficulty of piecing together the fate of fugitives in a fractured world. Interestingly, the files also underscore the human element of rumor and error. Reports of sightings often came from unreliable sources, locals mistaking elderly men for Hitler, or journalists amplifying second-hand stories. Intelligence agencies had to treat each claim with caution, balancing the need for thorough investigation against the risk of chasing false leads. The result is a detailed historical record of both actual escape efforts and the global imagination that these efforts sparked. Scientific and archival research together offer a complementary perspective, where forensic analysis confirms death, intelligence, and immigration records explain the broader context of Nazi flight and survival. The juxtaposition of physical proof with the infrastructure of escape routes allows historians to understand why some figures vanished entirely, while myths about Hitler's survival persisted. It also demonstrates the difference between verifiable evidence and speculation. While networks and records support the notion that high-ranking Nazis fled, none definitively link Hitler to these pathways. These revelations have contemporary significance as well. Modern historians use the combination of forensic science, document analysis, and archival research to teach broader lessons about the limits of historical knowledge, the role of rumor, and the challenges of verifying extraordinary claims. Public fascination continues, fueled by popular media, conspiracy documentaries, and newly accessible archives. The thrill of possibility, what if history had a hidden chapter, remains compelling, even in the face of overwhelming evidence to the contrary. While speculation about Hitler's survival captures imagination, the rigorous work of forensics and declassified intelligence firmly supports the historical consensus. The bunker remains the site of the final act, supported by physical remains, corroborated eyewitness testimony, and meticulous documentation. Yet the existence of escape networks, the scale of post-war migration, and the initial gaps in information explain why rumors have endured, keeping the story alive in both scholarly and popular circles. Even with Hitler's fate largely confirmed, the networks that helped other high-ranking Nazis vanish tell a story of influence, politics, and hidden legacies that stretched far beyond Europe's borders. Nazis in South America and political shadows. After the collapse of the Third Reich, South America became an unlikely refuge for a number of fleeing Nazis. Countries like Argentina, Brazil, and Chile offered geographic distance, sympathetic political climates, and sometimes direct assistance from local officials. Argentina, in particular, emerged as a key destination due to its policy of welcoming European immigrants, a strong German expatriate community, and the influence of leaders who were willing to shield former Nazis from extradition. This created an environment in which fugitives could live openly under assumed identities or quietly integrate into society, often evading justice for decades. The political ramifications were profound. Governments that harbored or ignored Nazi fugitives risked scrutiny from international actors, particularly the Allied powers and emerging human rights organizations. Yet, at the same time, these nations leveraged the presence of skilled, well-connected Europeans for economic and military development. Engineers, scientists, and bureaucrats who had served under the Reich found opportunities to apply their expertise, sometimes influencing local infrastructure, industry, and intelligence networks. The blurred line between refuge and exploitation highlights how geopolitics shaped the post-war landscape in ways that were far from transparent. The influence of Nazis in South America also extended into covert operations and intelligence activities. Some former officers and collaborators maintained connections with sympathetic European networks, exchanging information and maintaining clandestine communications. This not only facilitated their survival, but, in certain cases, helped foreign governments monitor shifting political landscapes. The networks served as early examples of transnational escape and espionage, illustrating the reach and resourcefulness of individuals who had once wielded significant power in Europe. Socially, the arrival of former Nazis created both tension and adaptation within local communities. Immigrant neighborhoods sometimes welcomed the newcomers for cultural and linguistic familiarity, while others remained suspicious or fearful. Over time, some fugitives assimilated entirely, marrying into local families, starting businesses, or participating in civic life. Others remained isolated, maintaining strict secrecy to avoid detection. This duality, assimilation and concealment, created complex social dynamics that historians and anthropologists continue to study, revealing the subtle ways that history can be hidden in plain sight. Culturally, the presence of Nazis influenced narratives and myths in South America. Local folklore, media accounts, and later investigative journalism often sensationalized the fugitive stories, feeding into a mixture of fear, curiosity, and fascination. Popular books and documentaries depicted secret bunkers, coded messages, and elaborate escape routes, sometimes blurring the line between historical fact and imaginative reconstruction. While much of this content is speculative, it shaped collective memory and public perception, leaving a lasting imprint on how the region's post-war history is understood. Economically, some fugitives leveraged connections and skills to establish legitimate businesses, contributing to sectors such as agriculture, manufacturing, and technical industries. Their participation was not always transparent, and in some cases, it indirectly supported networks of other fugitives. These economic contributions, combined with the political tolerance they often received, allowed certain individuals to thrive quietly, escaping both legal consequences and historical scrutiny. The legacies of these actions, whether through enterprise, influence, or mentorship, demonstrate how the post-war diaspora of Nazi officials left long-lasting effects beyond their immediate presence. Internationally, the existence of these networks posed legal and diplomatic challenges. The Allied powers, particularly the United States and Britain, sought to track and extradite known criminals, often relying on intelligence gathering, cooperation with local authorities, and covert operations. However, the political realities of South America, autonomy, local sympathies, and sometimes corruption made enforcement inconsistent. Some extraditions succeeded, others failed, and in many cases, the passage of time allowed fugitives to escape both accountability and the public eye. These patterns reveal the limits of post-war justice and the difficulties inherent in pursuing individuals across national and political boundaries. The psychological dimension of these hidden legacies is also significant. The knowledge that individuals responsible for some of history's worst atrocities lived freely in distant lands generated frustration, anger, and obsession among survivors, historians, and investigators. This fueled decades of research, journalism, and advocacy, with public interest remaining high into the 21st century. Stories of secret networks, hidden identities, and alleged encounters with former Nazis continue to captivate audiences, reinforcing both the historical significance and the enduring human fascination with these narratives. By the late 20th century, global attention increasingly pressured South American governments to confront the presence of Nazi fugitives. Trials, extraditions, and public investigations exposed individuals who had remained hidden for decades. These efforts, combined with the passage of time and the deaths of key figures, began to close the chapter on one of the most intriguing and unsettling migrations of the post-war era. Yet the impact on political structures, community memory, and international law remains relevant, highlighting lessons about the intersection of morality, governance, and historical responsibility. Finally, the legacy of Nazi fugitives in South America underscores the complexity of post-war history. While Hitler's death likely occurred in the Führerbunker, the escape and survival of others created a shadow world that influenced politics, society, and international relations long after the war ended. It serves as a reminder that history is rarely neat, and that the consequences of conflict often extend far beyond immediate events. The networks, allegiances, and migrations that enabled Nazi survival illustrate both human ingenuity and the persistent challenges of justice, leaving a lasting imprint on the global story of the 20th century. While some fugitives quietly integrated into society, traces of their presence, abandoned properties, coded correspondence, and unexplained movements hint at secrets that historians are still uncovering today. Settlements, shadows, and unfinished stories. Across South America, certain regions became hubs for former Nazis, forming semi-hidden communities that left traces still visible decades later. In Argentina, towns such as Bariloche and Buenos Aires neighborhoods with dense German-speaking populations often served as temporary or permanent homes. These areas offered social networks, sympathetic locals, and cultural familiarity, allowing former officers and collaborators to rebuild aspects of their lives while remaining largely invisible to authorities. Documents reveal that some fugitives purchased property, started businesses, and established private clubs, effectively creating enclaves where European customs and language persisted, blending seamlessly into the local fabric. Beyond Argentina, Brazil, Paraguay, and Chile also hosted individuals who had fled Europe, though often in smaller numbers. Paraguay, in particular, attracted former SS and military officials seeking extreme seclusion. Remote ranches and isolated settlements provided both physical and legal cover, allowing fugitives to operate beyond the reach of international scrutiny. In many cases, these locations offered self-sufficiency, fertile land, reliable water sources, and minimal interaction with government authorities. Letters and reports recovered from archives indicate a careful maintenance of secrecy, with communication limited to trusted networks and often coded to evade detection. Some settlements took on a quasi-organizational form, with former Nazis coordinating assistance for newcomers, providing shelter, documentation, and guidance on assimilation. These networks were not centrally controlled, but rather functioned through personal relationships, often leveraging pre-existing European connections. Intelligence files from the United States and Europe describe how these networks allowed dozens of fugitives to establish themselves safely, illustrating both the scale and sophistication of post-war migration. The result was a shadow society that, while mostly invisible, left subtle, lasting marks on the regions where it existed. In addition to residential enclaves, there were clandestine economic ventures that further obscured the fugitives' presence. Some individuals engaged in agriculture, forestry, and small-scale industry, using their technical expertise acquired during the war. These activities, while outwardly legitimate, sometimes served dual purposes, generating income and maintaining operational security. Evidence suggests that certain businesses were intentionally kept low profile, staffed only by trusted associates, and occasionally tied to transnational networks that facilitated further movements of people or information. Despite these precautions, investigators occasionally uncovered hints of these communities. Post-war intelligence reports contain accounts of unusual social gatherings, coded messages, and the presence of foreign nationals whose backgrounds were difficult to trace. Journalists in the latter half of the 20th century documented abandoned estates, cryptic diaries, and accounts from locals who remembered interactions with German-speaking strangers. Some of these reports remain ambiguous, never fully corroborated, but they collectively create a mosaic of hidden lives that defied official oversight. Cultural influence was another dimension of these settlements. In some towns, German-language newspapers, clubs, and schools persisted well into the 60s and 70s, maintaining traditions that reflected the settlers' European origins. Artifacts, family histories, and oral traditions preserved within these communities sometimes concealed their connections to wartime activity, contributing to a complex legacy that mixes cultural preservation with moral ambiguity. For historians, this creates a unique challenge. differentiating ordinary immigrant integration from deliberate concealment of wartime affiliations. Even today, some mysteries remain unresolved. Cryptic correspondences, unexplored archival records, and anecdotal reports suggest that certain individuals may have played roles in post-war political developments, financial networks, or intelligence operations. The full scope of these activities is difficult to measure, partly due to the passage of time and partly because many records were deliberately destroyed or remain classified. Nevertheless, these unresolved questions continue to attract researchers, journalists, and enthusiasts eager to piece together the remaining fragments of the post-war diaspora. Archaeological and historical fieldwork has occasionally uncovered physical evidence of these settlements. Abandoned estates, hidden bunkers, and reinforced structures hint at a life designed for security and privacy. Combined with analysis of migration patterns, property ownership, and immigration records, scholars have begun to map the contours of these networks, offering insight into how former Nazis navigated the challenges of exile. In many cases, these remnants are less about grand conspiracies and more about survival, adaptation, and secrecy, reflecting the lengths individuals went to avoid detection. The social memory of these settlements also highlights an enduring tension. Local populations often remember the German-speaking immigrants, yet the details of their wartime pasts were either unknown or deliberately suppressed. Over time, stories passed through families, sometimes distorted, sometimes preserved, creating a mixture of folklore, fact, and myth. This collective memory shapes how modern historians interpret the legacy of post-war migration, showing how community narratives can complicate efforts to reconstruct historical truth. The settlements, shadow networks, and remaining mysteries illustrate that the story of Nazi fugitives extends far beyond Europe. While Hitler's fate may have been sealed in the bunker, the networks that helped others escape created enduring legacies across continents. These communities, both hidden and partially visible, shaped cultural, economic, and political landscapes in ways that are still being unraveled today. Their existence reminds us that the consequences of global conflict are rarely confined to the battlefield, often leaving traces in distant lands, human memory, and historical archives alike. What do you think of Hitler's fate? Write your comments below and subscribe to stay on top of the untold stories.